Good morning, everybody. For those of you who are watching on the PGT YouTube channel, I'd like to welcome everybody to the thesis defense of Valeria González Calero, who is defending her thesis titled Elegy to the Last Face, the photograph of the death mask of Erich Sander, which is a translation from the Spanish Elegía al rostro final, la fotografía de la máscara mortuoria de Erich Sander by Laura Bravo. The committee is composed of the other readers, aside from myself, the other readers, and I'd like to thank you both so much for your participation in this process. Professors Aurora Lauzardo Ugarte and Jane Ramírez. So I think that the first thing that we will do is to listen to the presentation of Valeria about her project, and then after that we will have some feedback from the readers.
Okay, I'm going to start presenting. Please let me know if you can see my screen properly.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so good morning to everyone watching. Thank you, Professor Auerbach, for the presentation, and thank you, Aurora and Jane, for being here and agreeing to be part of the committee. Like the professor said, my translation is titled Elegy to the Last Face, the photograph of the death mask of Erich Sander. So a brief introduction. August Sander was a German photographer of the 20th century, regarded as one of the most important photographers of the time. And he spent most of his life, around 4 decades, taking portraits and compiling them in his greatest work, titled People of the 20th Century. Sander's aim with the project was to depict German society as it was, creating a sort of human atlas of the time he lived in, consequently telling the story of his own country. He therefore included hundreds of portraits of individuals from different social and economic backgrounds and documented some of Germany's most notable and turbulent periods, such as the Weimar Republic, the Nazi regime, and World War II. So here I wanted to include some of the images comprising the project. You can see the pastry cook on the left side, the National Socialist in the middle, and then a bricklayer on the right. For the thesis translation project, I chose to translate the article Elegía al rostro final, la fotografía de la máscara mortuoria de Erich Sander, which was published in 2020 in the online art journal Visión Doble, Revista de Crítica e Historia del Arte, by art historian Laura Bravo López. In this article, the author offers an analysis on the concluding portrait of people of the 20th century and reflects on its content, composition, and place within the project. The translation was done from Spanish into English, and a total of 11,180 words were translated. Some words on the author. Dr. Laura Bravo López is an art historian, an author, a current professor, and the former chair of the art history program of the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus, as well as the editor-in-chief and a collaborator for the online art journal Visión Doble of the same program. She has a PhD in art history from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid and has also conducted research at various institutions, such as the Tate Britain, the Museum of Modern Art, and La Maison Européenne de la Photographie in Paris. Additionally, she has worked as assistant curator at the International Center of Photography and has curated more than 20 exhibitions and art projects here in Puerto Rico and in Spain. A summary of the source text. Like I mentioned earlier, Bravo López analyzes in her article the concluding portrait of people of the 20th century, which is a portrait of August Sander's eldest son, Erich, specifically a photograph of his death mask. Erich had been sentenced to 10 years in prison by the Nazi regime for spreading anti-fascist propaganda and for belonging to the Socialist Workers' Party of Germany. But unfortunately, he died of a ruptured appendix in 1944, shortly before his release. After his death, August Sander commissioned the creation of his death mask, which he decided to then photograph and include in the portfolio Idiots, the Sick, the Insane, and Matter of the volume The Last People of the 20th Century. What is interesting about the portrait is that it is the only photograph of the project that does not show the actual face or body of a person, whether dead or alive. Instead, we can only see Erich through an object. The author argues that by including an image of the death mask, Sander immortalizes his son in two ways, by means of the mask and by means of the camera. So it allowed the artist to pay homage to his son, to recognize him as a political martyr of that time, and it also elevated him to the status of a monument. And in this manner, Erich is not only representative of his own personal history, but of an entire collective of people who died at the hands of the Nazis. So I have divided my translation challenges in a series of categories. I have linguistic issues, extra-linguistic issues, stylistic choices, concerns regarding style manual, citations, quotations, and notes. So I will give some examples from the first three categories and then one from the quotations category. So this is the first example from the linguistic issues category. In page 11 of the source text, the author states, esta composición comparte rasgos comunes con los postulados de la fotografía contemporánea de contexto de August Sander. En concreto, sus preocupaciones por la fotografía directa y sin adornos superfluos. In my translation, I rendered fotografía directa as straight photography because I read Andy Jones and Anne Haley's articles on Sander's work, and they both use the term straight in quotation marks to refer to his photographic style. So I decided to use it in that manner as well in my translation in quotation marks. And I believe this is how Sander referred to his own work, because as you can see in Haley's article, she is alluding to a lecture that Sander gave on the radio, and I think he used the term straight for his own style. In my translation, I also added an in-text citation with these two sources. And yeah, like I said, I use quotation marks for the term. This is the biggest extra linguistic issue that I could find. In page 2 of the source text, the author writes, aunque lo concibe alrededor de 1922, los más de 30,000 retratos que realizó para el proyecto datan entre 1892 y 1952 y abarcan épocas fundamentales de la historia de Alemania. So this book, I was able to find it, the one that the author cites, and it's a book edited by Sander's other son, Gunther, but I was not able to corroborate this information. It did contain the dates 1892 and 1952, but only in the title of the book, and it never mentioned them again. I instead relied on other sources. For example, this is a press release by the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it states that Sander started his project around 1922, so I was able to corroborate that piece of information there. And it also gives a bit more information on the amount of photographs he took for the project, which range from 30,000 to 40,000. And regarding the dates, 1992 and 1952, I relied on this source, which is a curatorial text by Valentin Roma and Guillermo Suaznavar for an exhibition of some of Sander's photographs. They do state that the oldest portrait is from 1892, but that the most recent one is from 1954 and not 1952, as the source text states. And I myself corroborated that these I corroborated these dates on the website dedicated to Sander's project. In fact, the most recent portrait is from 1954. And I added these two portraits here. The one on the left is the oldest one, and the one on the right, which is a portrait of the mayor of Cologne at the time, is the most recent one. In the translation, I fixed the date of the most recent portrait, and I also made a stylistic choice. I decided to write almost 40,000 portraits when talking about the number of photographs that he took, instead of more than 30,000, as the source text says, because the author will use the 40,000 amount in a later paragraph, and I wanted to be consistent. So I deleted the original in-text citation, and then I added a new one with the sources from which I was able to corroborate the information. This is a stylistic choice I made in this example. I added a bit of information to give context to the reader. Here I explain to the reader how so many of Sander's negatives came to be destroyed. And I got this information from these three sources, again, from the press release from Roma and Swasnabar, and an additional source, Von Spector. They state that Sander left Cologne during the war, taking with him around 10,000 negatives, and left behind approximately 30,000, which were later destroyed in a fire in 1946. Now I'm gonna go back. Regarding the date 1939 that is underlined, I decided to be a bit more general in my translation, and I wrote several years later because these three sources differ on the date, or at least Roma and Swasnabar do. They give a completely different year, 1942, and then the Met and Von Spector are again a little bit more general. So that was my reasoning behind making that stylistic choice as well. Another instance in which I decided to add information is when the author lays out the structure of people of the 20th century. Laura states that the project is composed of 7 portfolios, each one corresponding to a different social group. However, these 7 groups should be considered volumes instead, each one then further divided into a series of portfolios. And these are the classifications that MoMA uses. So in the translation, I clarified that the project contains both, and I also include the actual titles of each one of these volumes in quotation marks and with the proper capitalization. This is the final example that I'm going to give from the quotations category. At one point, Laura quotes some remarks by Sander, which she herself has translated from English into Spanish. This quotation comes from Andy Jones's article on Sander's work, but Jones is actually quoting another text that contains those comments by Sander, which have in turn been translated from German into English. So this means that the original German text was translated into English and published in a book, which Jones quotes in his article, and then Laura quotes and translates into Spanish in her article. So I wanted to get as close as possible to the original, as recommended by the MLA handbook regarding indirect sources, and I decided to instead cite the book, the original book containing the German to English translation, which I was able to find online. Therefore, I also deleted the original in-text citation and added a new one with the new book. Conclusion. So this is a text that discusses the visual, that is photography, and while the author mainly examines the photograph of Erich's death mask, she also does refer to other images of Sander's project at specific points. So it was very important for me to have these images on hand. Thankfully, I did not have any issues. All photographs of people of the 20th century are readily available online, so I was able to access all of them. Instead, most of the problems arose when searching for the sources that Bravo López used, because she uses a lot. And when making stylistic choices, whether that be adding information for the benefit of the reader or dividing or reformulating sentences, because I found that it was some sentences were very long and overly complicated, and I had to really dissect the source text to understand what the author was trying to say. And then some final words on the relevance of the translation. Translation of the article will add to scholarship about Sander and his work, and it will also bring more readers to Visión Doble, therefore highlighting one of our projects here at the UPR. These are the works cited in the presentation. And with that, I conclude the presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Valeria, for your presentation. And it certainly brings a lot of different issues to the fore that were involved, that you were involved in this project. You also didn't mention other things that we've discussed together, and but I'd like to direct the defense today now to the other readers, and Jane or Aurora, would either one of you like to begin with your questions and your comments about Valeria's work?
As you wish. Jane, do you want to start?
I can go first, sure. Okay. Well, the very first note on my paper here, and don't worry, David, it's not very much. It's large font. The very first note is underneath your name is preface made me very happy. And I could have said thesis made me very happy. And I'm going to add your presentation just now made me very happy. This is the kind of stuff that people don't realize that professional translators go through, especially with academic works. And I commend you. I'm very impressed with the work that you've done here, by the sources that you found, by your eagerness. I don't know whether that came from you or David or both, but your eagerness to verify all of those sources, that's so very important. And a lot of people don't realize you need to do that. So I don't want to just jump quickly through other things, except what else can I say? It's marvelous. Your attention to detail. Let's see, I added a particular, one of the first things that struck me was post-mortem, because I was all ready to write you a note saying post-mortem in English is one word. And then I realized, oh, okay, he's writing in Spanish. And oh, look at this. Later on in English, you've used one word. So that's, as someone who argues with people about whether back seat should be and backyard should be one word or two when whether they're adjectives or nouns, those things are important to me, and I'm impressed that you got that right. Also, punctuation. One of the first things I saw was a series in which there were items with internal commas, and you separated the items with a semicolon. And that's not just, of course you did. Many people don't. So I was very happy about that. I think you slipped up once, and I pointed that out. But it's wonderful to see that much attention to detail going on especially in academic text. You wrote in your preface, most extra linguistic information in the article was easily corroborated in the author's sources. And I wrote there, and you'll get all of these comments that I'm talking about. I will send them to you afterwards, but that's why it's so, I said, yes, that's why it's so important to research the sources in the footnotes in the bibliography before you start translating, or at least during the translation. A lot of translators, or at least student translators, leave that stuff, the bibliography and the footnotes and that sort of thing. I'll do that at the end. I want to dive right into the translation. But it's a mistake, because I know from my own thesis years ago that I struggled to even understand the source text. And then I got good advice and I started researching the footnotes instead, and I started gathering those sources, reading from those sources. And then when I went back to the source text, hey, I could understand it now. And I knew some of the language with which to express it, because I had been reading in both Spanish and English. I had been reading, and what better place to start than the very sources that the author chose. So that I commend you on that research and that attention to the sources, on finding sources that the author did not cite, and finding more, going, as you said, to as far back, as close to the original as you possibly can get. By the way, that radio broadcast wasn't in English though, was it? Okay, you're muted, but I could see that you said no.
Yeah, it was in German, but it was translated into English, and I was able to find one book. It didn't have all of the lectures, but it had one, and it was specifically one that it had that quote that the author uses.
Okay, excellent. So I wasn't clear of that. I will say, to give credit where due, Professor Yvette Torres is one who has taught right from the start. Research the footnotes first. And I completely agree with her. Okay, this is the example of the semicolons that I mentioned, and I'm not going to read it. I was glad to see that there. As I made when you get my comments, you'll see highlighting in yellow, and that's where I've made a comment in the margin, but you'll see highlighting in turquoise also. When it's highlighted in turquoise, that means, oh, that's good. I really like that. And I didn't highlight nearly enough of them, because it would have made a very messy paper to send to you to have all that turquoise highlighting. I could have highlighted a great deal more, but I did put some turquoise in on the extra linguistic issues, because that particular section of your preface was very well organized and detailed. And again, it's so important to verify all the data in our source text. So that's good. Now, to something that wasn't perfect. You also, okay, not only your research, but also your writing were excellent. It was a struggle to read the source text. And I was tempted to always go to your English, to your and I do often read the English first, because I want to read it to make sure it stands alone and is clear without having extra information that I've already read from the source text. So I usually read yours first, but trying to find where I was in trying to find my place in the source text was hard, because it was a little muddy in places, and you cleared it up very, very well. Your sentences were direct and clear, with very, very rare exceptions. You got in all the information, but you got it in an order that was much, much more accessible, much more readable. So both your research and your writing made me quite happy. But there were a couple of things I want to point out. One error that I noticed repeatedly, so I want to call attention to it, so that you can be aware. And I marked it, are dangling modifiers. You started a lot of sentences with a phrase, and then the sentence went off in a different direction. Like there are at least 3 times that are very, very similar. So I cited one of these. It's on page 18 of Roman numeral 18. You don't necessarily need to go there because I can read it, but if you want to find it, it's there. It says, after having talked to the author, and this is you saying that you talked to Laura Bravo López. After having talked to the author, she clarified that with humana, she was referring to the ordinary people, those belonging to Unamuno's intrahistory. If you're looking for it, look for Unamuno. I don't know which paragraph it's in because I clipped it for my notes, but it's where Unamuno is.
Yeah,
Okay, you're there? So after having talked to the author, the very next word needs to be the subject of the sentence, the second subject of that phrase. So who talked to the author? And it should have been I.
okay.
So I gave you 2 versions. You can say, after having talked to the author, I realized that with humana, she was saying, or you can take away that after and say, you don't have to take notes of this. These are all in the
Okay,
notes.
perfect.
The other version would be take out the after and say, I talked with the author and she clarified that with humana she was referring to. But if you use a phrase like that, after having talked to the author, you have to say who talked to the author. So that particular thing of you talking to the author comes up 3 times, I think. Yes, 3 times. And there were a couple other occasions with other dangling modifiers at the beginning. So I hope by looking carefully at those examples, then you can catch that little glitch that you have in your writing and make it even better.
Okay.
So, and I have one question here I want to ask just for curiosity. You translated the abstract, of course, at the beginning. And there were keywords, and the keywords were photography, death, August Sander, Erich Sander, death mask, index. How is index a keyword for this article? The word index doesn't even, or indice doesn't even appear in the source text. Why is that something about abstracts that I don't know, or?
I mean, at one point in the source text, the author says that the photograph is an index. And I think that's why she included it.
Okay, I searched the source text for indice. I don't know if I misspelled it or something. But I didn't find it at all in the source text. So I was just curious. I mean, you translated it because that's what was there. She wrote indice, you wrote index. But does anybody have a comment on that one? On why? Is there a reason why index would be in there? I mean, even if it appears once, I wouldn't have thought that was a keyword, but I don't know. Okay, no, I was just curious. Oh, and right after that, and this is one of the, I noted it because it's one of the very few omissions in your work. You omitted the fact that you omitted Erich's birthplace when you talked about his birth. And I think the fact that he's from Cologne is relevant.
No, I omitted that because it's wrong. I found a picture of his tombstone and it lists his birthplace as Linz because they moved to Cologne afterwards. So I was like, I'm just not gonna say Cologne. I could add Linz then.
Ideally, that should be either that proper information should be in the text, or you should say something about that in your preface. I'm not going to say I require you to do that because, maybe it wouldn't even be noticed, but I didn't notice anything that said it. So it's very, very, very soon after this, it mentions that when Sander hired someone, he hired someone from Cologne to make the death mask. And I thought, okay, well, well, how did Cologne get into this? Will people know? But if it's wrong, of course you didn't want to put it in there.
Yeah, he left Cologne and but I was living in Cologne. I have a question for Valeria then. Just based on this on Jane's comment. Have you compared the authoritative texts that you've looked at on August Sander to see how they reference his birthplace?
Erich's birthplace.
Good point.
Oh, wait, are we talking about Erich Sander or
We're
August?
talking about Erich.
Oh, Erich, okay. All right, well, how do they refer to his birthplace?
So it was a picture of a photograph of the tombstone that I was able to find in this website dedicated to graves.
Mm-hmm.
And there it states the birth dates and the place of birth. And it say that he was born in Linz, but that he died in Cologne, I think it was, in Siegburg, because he died in Siegburg prison, which I think is in Cologne. But I do remember distinctly that it said that his birthplace was Linz.
Oh,
And
okay.
that gravestone was the only reference you found to his birthplace?
Yes, it was the only one that I could find, because I think that Laura uses one of the non-working links for that specific piece of information. And because I was not able to access it, I couldn't corroborate it anywhere else. But when I was reading biographies of Sander, at one point it did say that he moved with his family to Cologne to open up a studio for photography. And that was in the
Since Erich is the oldest son and he moved with his family,
Mhm.
although, you know, family could be mother-in-law and so forth, but at least the assumption is along with the tombstone photograph.
I'm just curious whether this whether this incorrect information is repeated many other places. That was kind of my question, Valeria, whether it is stated in many other places that he was born in Cologne.
No, I didn't find that anywhere.
Oh, okay. I mean, did they mention, aside from this is the thing, aside from the gravestone, do we have, or do any texts refer to his birthplace or?
I couldn't find anything.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting.
And that is, I'm glad I brought it up.
And not even his year. I could only corroborate the year of his birth in the photograph of the tombstone.
Wow.
That's very weird.
It is.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. It's very interesting. I mean, since so much attention has been focused on this particular photograph, and you know, so many articles have been written about it, it just seems so curious that people would like, well, disregard, you know, basic information, basic biographical information about Erich Sander.
But that's what I was thinking about, and I didn't do it. I didn't Google it because I thought, okay, he was born in Cologne and Valeria just missed it. But you'd think that you'd be able to Google where was Erich Sander born and find out. And obviously Valeria has made an exhaustive search and has not found it. So that's strange. Okay, so I will remain curious about that one, but thank you for explaining why you left it out. And I feel better about that now. I'm curious about another thing. Moving on. On page 8 of the translation.
But I just, sorry.
I'm sorry. Sure, go ahead.
Just interrupt you 1 second. I just Googled it and I found in Wikipedia that it does give his birthplace as Linz.
Okay, I think I did look at that, but because it's Wikipedia, I don't know.
Well, you know, we shouldn't disregard Wikipedia. If any Wikipedia article is well cited, you know, it certainly shouldn't be disregarded, and you can always go to the sources that are mentioned, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And that took me 2 seconds to find. It's odd that that information that he was born in Cologne should appear in this article.
Okay. No, but personally, I think you should, I think you should include his actual birthplace in the
Okay.
text.
Yes, absolutely.
That's not, that, yes, I see you writing something. That one won't be in my comments, so. But you'll remember it when you see the comment about that. All right, there's another one that's more of my curiosity. On page 8 of the translation, that's page 49 of the thesis, we read these hundreds of faces, including that of his son Erich, and the stories they tell are individual pieces that make up a common history. Why hundreds? And if I recall, yes, in the source text, it said miles de rostros, and we're talking about 40,000. And you just mentioned in your presentation that, quoting from your presentation, I wrote it down, almost 40,000 portraits, because I thought maybe a whole lot of those photographs are not portraits. But why did you cut that down from 1,000 to hundreds?
And what page is that?
I have page 8 of the translation, page 49 of the thesis.
Okay, I'm looking for it. I'm not finding it.
I'm sorry, I did not make a note of where on the page I found that. But if you search your
Yeah, I have it here. I can search.
for hundreds, by
Mhm.
hundreds, I think you'll find it.
Okay, these hundreds of faces, including that of his son Eric, that's the one, right?
Right. But the source text says miles de rostros.
Okay, that might have, I might have slipped on that one. That might be it, yeah.
And in that page, you find hundreds twice, so check which one it is. It says an archive comprising hundreds of photographs of individuals, and then out of the hundreds of portraits of that Sander, so check both.
Okay, so, all
Okay,
right, well, please check that.
yeah.
Okay. I'm almost done. I have 2 maybe errors, but I'm not sure, and I do want to consult my colleagues on them. This is from page 11 of the translation, page 52 of the thesis, where it says, however, by means, I think this is near the top of the page, if I recall correctly, by means of a photograph that August took of himself in his living room, the artist reveals that he kept and displayed on his wall 5 portraits of his son, including that of his death mask, in a domestic and more personal setting. And there's a citation of Emser, Gerd, Sander, and in Wade. That might help you find the place if anybody's still looking. Okay, a photograph that August took of himself. The source text doesn't say that it's a self-portrait, just that he himself took it. But then I know you've seen a lot of these photos, which I have not seen. And you added the detail about them being in the living room. So I'm guessing that your information is accurate, but the source text says, el homenaje que August Sander rinde a su hijo Erich en gente del siglo XX se proyecta por una parte a través de la inclusión. Okay, that's de algunos retratos fotográficos. I'll skip to the part that corresponds to that translation. Sin embargo, gracias a una fotografía de su misma autoría, Sander mostraba que también conservaba y exponía en un ámbito doméstico y más personal 5 retratos de su hijo en una de las paredes de su casa, la de su máscara mortuoria incluida. And you added the detail of it being living room, and that it was a self-portrait, that Auguste himself was in the picture. So is that from the information that you found by looking at the pictures?
So I tried to find the image. I was unable to, but I got this information from the source that she cites, Gerd Sander, that is August's grandson.
Mhm.
And Wade interviewed him, and this is from one of his quotes. He actually says that he had this in his living room. I can't remember if he said it was a self-portrait, but that's how I interpreted the source text, that it was a self-portrait.
Well, the source text says, una fotografía de su misma autoría, Sander mostraba. So it says he's the author of the portrait. In other words, he took the picture. But whether he himself was in it or not
Oh, okay, now I see.
is
If
my
he's
question.
in the picture. Okay, I will look at the Wade, the source, reread that interview that he from Sanders's grandson, and I'll see if he was in the picture himself.
Okay, thank you. And then I had put down here, question, if you're including our additional info, does that need a translator's note? Well, you've settled that for me by now because you gave the source. And if you find it, but then if you find in a source that it's a self-portrait, then that source also needs to be included, or maybe it's already there. But what stopped me was that self-portrait. So I wanted to check on that. Okay, and just two more comments here. This is another one where I'm curious. I want my colleagues' opinion. So if you want to make the effort to go to this is also from page 18 of the translation. Also, was that where the other one was? I don't know. Anyway, it's from page 18 of the translation, page 59 of the thesis. It's unlike every other face that Sander included in his project. Erich's is shown through a mold and as a real figure, becoming a symbolic paradox between the death of the subject and the internal existence of the object that survived the subject. All right, have we found that?
Yes.
Okay. I did say, I think maybe by means of a mold might be better than saying it's Erich's face is shown through a mold, which feels like looking through it. So maybe by means of a mold. But this is just a crazy thought. Do you think that maybe Bravo Lopez meant a royal figure? She said como figura real. And when I look at that death mask, I think King Tut. So it just struck me, well, real can be real or it can be royal. And maybe it's just, I see from David's scowl that he's not thinking so. So, and that's fine. You know, I just wondered. I wanted some other opinions.
I think what you could do for that one is you could ask Laura Bravo what she meant. Did she mean real, you know, in terms of reyes or real?
Well, do you think that's a possibility even, or do you from the context?
I think it could be because I read one of the sources that the author cites. I'm trying to think about it. It was either Hans Belting's text, but it did talk about death masks, and it talked specifically about masks of royalty.
Because who else could afford it?
Mm-hmm.
Or could command people to do it, you know? So yeah, it struck me, and I wanted to know what others thought. So if you find out something, I'm not going to put this burden on you, but if you happen to find out something and you happen to want to get in touch with me and tell me what the answer was, I would love to know it. Just curious. Okay, my final comment is jumping to the end matter. It's so nice to see an impeccably formatted bibliography. I admit, by the time I got to the third page of the bibliography, I wasn't even checking it very carefully because everything was right. It was the entire thesis was practically immaculate as far as formatting was concerned, and I'm in awe. That was great. One thing you add in the endnotes, of course, 3 of those endnotes are yours. Which was a little bit confusing at first. Of course, I knew that you were adding translator's notes. You said so in the preface, but I was comparing it to the source text. We have talked before. David and I believe Aurora and I have talked before. And I know I proposed putting the words translator's note at the beginning of the note and not in parentheses.
Okay.
Because that tells the reader up front. And also tells, like, for instance, the author, or anybody else who might be comparing this to the source text, tells them why there's extra notes, and it tells the reader right up front, this is not the author speaking, this is the translator. And I don't think we need to be shy about it. It's not a thing of trying to seek attention, but it's important information. I would start right out with, unless your advisor tells you not to, I would start those 3 out with translator's note. No need for, I would say no need for the parentheses or brackets. Just write translator's note and a colon and then write your information.
Okay, I've never seen it that way, so, you know, but that doesn't mean it's not a good idea at all.
You will be seeing it that way because I've got some thesis students coming up that I've been suggesting that to, so.
No, I mean, I've never seen it in published works before, that's
Okay.
all. But it's fun.
But I've also never seen any rules anyplace about how we're supposed to do it, so. I mean, style manuals sometimes have specific information. But anyway, that's up to you. But excellent thesis, very interesting, very well written. Congratulations, and I'll turn it over to Aurora.
Thank you. Well, Jane was quite thorough in some of her comments that I also noted, so I will only add to what Jane already said in my observations. But first of all, I have to tell you, this is a superb work, Valeria. This thesis is awesome, really it is. And I wish that a lot of students are watching this defense, because I think it's exemplary of how you deal with an academic text, which is difficult, which is complex. And I really hope that students are watching this and that they heard all the good things that you did that Jane just mentioned, and some of the good things that I will add to what Jane already said. So really, this is a mature work. This is the work of a professional. And if I were the editor of this article, or where this article is to be published, I would call you again and again and again to work with me. So let me tell you first that, well, your presentation was beautiful, and I think that the photographs that you added to your presentation before.
Yes, thank you.
I think it was very revealing. It was spot on, the exact amount of information that people who have not read your thesis now can access. And I like very much how you presented the author, how you presented the text. I think you have been very respectful of the text, which sometimes when we deal with a difficult text, we may, complain a little bit about the author. And I think that it is very important that we treat our authors with utmost respect. And that is something that you did, regardless of whether we had a hard time translating them or not. It is very important. And again, that is a sign of a mature translator. I have been dealing in my course this semester with parallel text that we use to help us write about a topic in the target text. And your use of parallel texts is extraordinary. And I think that the precision with which you translated the text is due mainly because you did an excellent research of parallel text, and like the direct fotografía, the straight photography, all those examples that you gave are, they show that there is a mature researcher there looking for the right way to say these terms in the target text. So I commend you on the use of parallel text, and I think I'm going to invite you to my class to talk about parallel text, because you did an excellent job with parallel text. And most importantly, you documented them, because sometimes, yes, I use parallel text, and yes, my translation is accurate, but where did you find it? How did you do this? What was your process? And I think that that is revealed in your preface and also in your explanation. I think that, and that is also a problem. All of us have translated academic texts. How to deal with quotations. And when a translator has to translate a quotation, sometimes we have to go back to the source and not translate the author's translation, but go to the source, right? And that also is something that would seem obvious, but not always is. And that requires research. That requires, I recently worked with a book that had 800 notes, and you have to go to the source. You cannot translate the author's translation of Bartolomé de las Casas, right? So I think that you did exactly what needs to be done. And I think it's very important that you noted it in your preface, because since the preface is a self-standing text, and the preface is a text that will be published in our repository, it is important that this is documented so that anyone who reads your preface understands your process and takes example from your process. So again, I commend you on all the research, and your preface is exemplary, okay? I have a few comments and a couple of questions, which are mostly out of curiosity than actually asking you to revise it or to go over it. But as I said, I'm going to go, and I'm going to send you this document with my few comments. As I said, your preface is exemplary. I noted that you didn't include the mask of the actual article, which is in the article. I didn't see it.
The photograph of the mask?
The photograph of the mask, I didn't see it. So check it, because it is in the source text, but I didn't see it in the
I see it.
in your
Yes.
translation. Yeah, and I
printed a copy yesterday and I see that it's not here. But I do have it in my computer, in my copy.
Okay, well then, I in the document that I received, I couldn't see it. I did see the other one, but
Okay. Yeah.
and since you have all this access to the photographs, well, I suggest that you include it. I think it was just a little slip.
Yeah.
Yes?
No, I will add the photograph, make sure that it is in the.
Yeah, my version, which maybe was a slightly earlier version, has the photograph. So Jane?
Are we talking about the translation, about Valeria's thesis?
Yeah.
Because my version has the photograph of the death mask.
Of the death mask, really?
Yes.
It's right by the section that begins with the historical value of a familiar face.
Yeah. Let me go quickly over, because
Figure one.
I noticed that it was so much clearer than the one in the source text.
I have figure 2 of.
It's figure 1. It's on page 4 of the translation.
No,
Which is
I don't
page
have it.
45 of the.
No, I don't have it. I don't have it. You will see, well, you'll see my version. It's just that I was surprised that it was not there, but I didn't
But
see it.
I printed a copy yesterday, and I'm seeing in my copy that it doesn't have that picture. It only has
Okay,
the figure too.
exactly. That's the version that I have. Okay. Out of curiosity, because when we're fortunate that the authors are alive, did you talk with the Dr. Bravo about any of the changes that you suggest, or?
Yes, I did meet with her at one point, and I obviously had a few questions. She clarified some of them. I wasn't gonna bombard her with so many questions. But I did talk to her. I pointed out some of the mistakes that she made, and she did take note. She told me that she was going to revise it,
Mhm.
specifically with in-text quotations, because there were a lot of mistakes with the sources, the page numbers that she cited. So I did talk to her and I let her know that. And also she forgets to include some of them in the works cited, and even in the source text. So yes, I did talk to her and I told her that.
Okay, okay. Do you foresee that this article is going to be published in English?
I hope so. I think it is, because this text was suggested to be by Dr. Auerbach, because Laura wanted to translate it into English.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
she said that she had been to some conferences where, and I think that she presented on Erich Sander, and it was suggested that she have this translated, which is why she's wanted it translated for a while, for a few years. And so I think the idea is that once this is finalized, the English translation will go up on Vision Doble. That's
Great,
my understanding.
great, great, fantastic. Okay, again, I have a lot of praise for this work, and I think that something that you did very well in page 16 of your preface, in the quote, it says, in postmortem photography, one of the traditional ways to photograph the dead was in their coffin. However, photographers have also had creative freedom when posing the body and when deciding on the perspective of the composition. I think that, yes, what you did there was very, very good. And one comment also in that same page, and it has to do, and this is the only thing that I would like to hear your opinion. There are many decisions that you make that enrich the translation. I mean, that enrich the text. The translation is rich. But there are other times when I felt that you changed the syntax a lot. And there are only a few, and I marked them. There are only a couple of instances where I'm not sure if that made it clearer.
In the translation.
The translation, yes. I sometimes I saw that you changed the syntax quite a bit, and although many times it enriches the text in your translation, there are times when you don't need to oversimplify, because we're assuming that the reader is the same reader or has the same level of knowledge than the reader of the source text. So it's not that it's wrong, but sometimes I think that maybe you change the syntax too much in the text. And I have a question, and I think this also has to do with the real or the royal that Jane was talking about. on page 18 of your preface, the source text, I am in the paragraph that begins, additionally, when Bravo Lopez writes, and let me see. Okay. You write, this drive to remember the faces of important political, social, and intellectual faces, as well as those who were merely human, could account for Sander's decision to end People of the 20th Century with Erich's death mask. Okay? Hold on a minute.
I see what you have there. Yeah, I see that there's a shift. There's a semantic shift from, and it sort of leaves out some la intelectual y la humana. I don't think that's reflected in the translation. I would suggest revising that, looking closely at the source text and revising it.
Yeah, I would suggest that. But Valeria, this is picking and pecking any little thing that could be improved. Okay, so I agree with Jane's suggestions, and also I have to say it again because I hope that there's students watching this defense. It's impeccable. Your bibliography, as Jane said, getting there at the end, it was like, ay, qué bien, qué alivio. I don't have to start looking at little things and correcting these bibliography details. Okay, so but that one sentence of the nobleza, reconsider it. Okay.
Okay.
What else? I think, oh, and I have a question. You mentioned some non-working links. How do you deal with non-working links?
So what I did was corroborate the information in other sources, but I made sure to use the sources that the author cited in her article. I did use Professor Auerbach did suggest putting the links in the archive.org, see if I could find them. I did find one of them, but the others I could not find. They are no longer available online. So I just opted to eliminate them because the reader is not going to be able to access those links.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should I?
It's, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I'm concerned about getting away from that page. I was lost for a bit. I was looking at the source text and I couldn't find my way back to the meeting to unmute myself and be able to say that part that you noticed on page 18 with the this drive to, I noticed a problem that I thought was what you were going to say, but then you didn't. You actually have faces twice in that line, Valeria, and you have we ought to remember the faces of the something, something, something faces.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, I see it now.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
I meant like the whole sentence, just go over it and yeah. So my question again is, do you use Wayback Machine?
That's archive.org. Yeah, it's on archive.org. So the Internet Archive includes Wayback Machine. Yeah, I mean, not everything works, with that way.
Yeah, no, because
The other possibility that did you try a cached version on Google?
No, I didn't.
Okay, that's another possibility when you're looking for something.
Okay.
You have to try searching for a number of different ways, like maybe by the title, not by the URL, and then you may get a result, but it will when you click on the result, it will be a link, you have to go back, and then there should be a drop-down menu, and it would say cached version. But the thing is that if there's a cached version on Google, presumably there should be something on the Wayback Machine. But those are the only two ways I know of finding it, unless, you know.
Yeah.
Was this only an online source?
For the non-working links, they were online, but I was able to corroborate the information in other sources. For example, the one at the very beginning, in the source text, she cites biography, and that's an article of Erich Sander's biography, but that information I could easily find in the other sources that she cited. And
But
I
if
think
Erich Sander's biography, it would be another corroboration of his birthplace, perhaps.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, because I'm bringing this up because I am really picturing this defense, and I guess it is recorded, and so students could come back to it. I'm seeing this defense like a little master class, and I would like the people who are watching the defense to know what you did with the non-working links, which is a problem, and especially when we're working with documents that date back in time, we often find those links that don't work. And I think that that people who translate academic texts should know what to do then. And of course, if it doesn't work, you will eventually need to eliminate it or substitute for another source, and maybe give a little explanation. Since normally those links are in the notes, you could add a little translator's note and say which would be the appropriate way to do this. So
Yeah,
again,
I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
What I was going to suggest is maybe go back, and you can also Google how to do a cached search. But I would double check those through a cached search. But as I said, presumably, if you can't see it as a cached search, and if you can't find it on Wayback Machine, you're probably not going to see it on a cached search. So,
Yeah.
but Wayback Machine is really very, and I always stress in all of my classes, archive.org in general, the Internet Archive is incredible. It's invaluable. And all of us scholars should donate to them, because I'm always scared that things are going to start disappearing from it, or it's going to shut down, which would be a disaster. So.
Yeah, and again, I just brought this up because it is part of it. It is a quality of a mature translator to know how to look for these things and know how to deal with a non-working link or whatnot. So again, Valeria, I only have words of praise for your work, and my comments are mostly the result of my enthusiasm as I was reading your text, and my admiration for how well you handle problems that are typical of this kind of translation. I think you have done a beautiful work, and I really hope that students see this defense and that they can learn from this, because to me it was like a little master class, really.
Thank you.
Okay, so I am done, and I am ready to have an extensive deliberation in your grade.
Oh, yeah. I'd like to add something to what you just said about the master class. I've already planned to have my students read your preface once it's published.
Yeah.
Especially any of my students who are working on academics. But all of them, because they all need to know this information. You never know when you can have a text on any topic and have a quotation pop up, and you have to deal with it. So
Yeah, we're going to teach academic texts in January. So, well, you might get an invitation. And of course, we will use your preface as an example of a very, very well written and documented and researched work.
Yeah, that would be
I will
nice.
certainly use it for all my new thesis students. I will certainly use yours as an example.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
For a preface.
So we're officially telling you that your text is going to be used by many of us. Yes, yes. Excellent, excellent job. So we're ready, Barbara, whenever you.
Barbara? Defense. Valeria, we had no option whatsoever but to give you a sobresaliente con recomendación de publicar. So you put us into a corner. There was nothing we could do. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.